What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in on today's video. I'm Gabe, and today we are going to share the how, why, and what was the reasoning behind purchasing my 5th generation Camaro ZL1. Now, we just hit the 6-month mark of ownership, and right before I make that 6-month ownership review experience, where I go into details of what it's been like and some of the observations that I've had, I want to first start off by telling you guys the story behind why I purchased this car and how was the process behind obviously thinking about buying the car, and then of course the day of picking up the car and driving it home for the first time. To be honest, I'm not really sure why I didn't do this video earlier. I guess I was just so excited to finally get my hands behind my ZL1 and just film all of the content that I've obviously uploaded over the last few months. So in today's video, it's not gonna be about the how has it been, but rather how did we get to this point? And hopefully in this video of all of my trials and tribulations to finally getting my hands on this car, hopefully you guys will walk away with some informative information on what it's like to purchase a car of this age and of this type of classification. And also you guys will leave with some hee-hee-ha-has of what my story was like buying this car. So guys, without further ado, let's go for a drive. Now, before we go for a drive and get into the story time, I just want to let you guys know that I'm going to leave out some information about the financials. So for example, the monthly payments, the interest rate, the insurance, because I'm going to be disclosing all of that information at a later point in time when I decide to sell this car, to ultimately tell you guys if this car was really worth the investment. And I'm also going to retain the identity of the individuals that I was interacting throughout the purchase of this car for privacy reasons. No more disclaimers. All right, let's get into it. Okay guys, so I want to take you guys back to December of 2022, when at the time that I had my aqua blue metallic Camaro SS, I was already in the idea that I was going to end up selling the car. And by that time, I had narrowed down the 2 candidates to the C6 Z06 Corvette and obviously the 5th generation Camaro ZL1. The reason why I chose the C6 Z06 is really because I absolutely loved that platform. It was one of the best reviews that I've ever done. It's one of the most enjoyable cars I've ever driven. And honestly, for the age and the price, the amount of bang for your buck is surreal. And it was a great candidate, I'll be honest. Now, the 5th Gen ZL1 has always been a car that has always intrigued me. It wasn't really my dream car per se, but it was definitely a car that always interested me, and it would be the first time that I would own and drive a boosted Camaro, because I had never driven a boosted Camaro platform, or any Camaro, 6th gen or 5th gen. So obviously that was a great candidate in itself, and it obviously ended up paying off. Entering the last day of the year when I uploaded this video talking about, well, asking you guys, look, the new year's coming up, and I don't know what to do. Should I, A, scenario 1, sell the car and get a newer Camaro? And by newer Camaro, I basically meant either a 5th generation ZL1, which was this option, or a 6th gen SS, because the 6th gen ZL1 was completely out of the question. I mean, there was just, the funds were not available for that. The second option was to sell the Camaro, the ABM Camaro, and get a Corvette or a different platform. And a lot of you guys actually showed a lot of interest in that option, and also in the first option. But it wasn't until we got to option C, which was basically to keep the car and just modify it. And obviously I got a lot of people saying, hey, don't sell the car, modify it, you know, it's not worth spending the money on a ZL1 or even going to another platform because, you know, you are Camaro based. And while that's true, I still got a lot of people rooting for me for option B. So at the end of the day, we had two options that were Camaro-centric. That was about 66%. I want to say that everything was pretty much dead even. And after reviewing over 110 comments from you guys, which is honestly incredibly humbling and really just touching, that everybody was so not only concerned about me possibly selling the car and obviously excited for me possibly buying a new car, but everybody just weighed in their opinion on the fact, and I think that was just awesome, and I thank you guys immensely. After I tallied up the poll, I realized that sticking with Camaro would always pay off. But at the time, I realized that the amount of money that I would have to put into the car for me to get to the exact performance standards that I'm at now with the ZL1, I didn't have the money. Let's just be honest. I did not have the money at all, nor did I have the facilities or the time to build all these things. Now, the content would be crazy. I ended up deciding that the 5th gen ZL1 was really the better option for me. And while a Corvette was an interesting prospect, it just honestly didn't seem like it was going to really fit into my objectives and my goal and my desire to stay with the Camaro platform, because I love this platform. I really, really do. I would probably have to get a pretty high mileage C6 Z06 with some of the concerns of the LS7 and other nuances that come with having a C6 Z06. Really, for the same price as a very, very low mileage, perfectly kept ZL1. And this is exactly what this car ended up being. It was honestly pristine when I first got it. Now, I got my hands on it and there's been a couple of things here and there, but ultimately this car was perfect the way it was when I found it. I mean, how can you get tired of that? But on all retrospect, the point of buying a newer Camaro would definitely be to upgrade. And while the 6th gen SS was something that could have been possible, I just didn't see me selling a very special car like the aqua blue metallic Camaro SS for a 6th gen SS, even though the 6th gen is better in pretty much every way rather than, I think, than look and then sound. It just didn't really make much sense. And the 6th gen ZL1, as I mentioned before, was completely out of my price range. So there you have it. We know what car we're going to get. The 5th generation Camaro ZL1. And that's that. I mean, for many months, I kind of just sat on it. I wasn't really too eager. I kept the Camaro SS for several months. I did some very nice content. I kept doing my thing. And it was right until, I would say, late May that I started to realize that I was getting a lot of itches to get the ZL1. I mean, I found myself constantly looking at 5th gen ZL1s for sale on all of the different, car websites. Juan Carlos, which is one of my friends that actually works for a Chevrolet dealership, he's a sales guy there. He was, dripping a little bit of some listings that he would see here and there, some Camaro ZL1s that were pretty close to us or, out of state. And at the time, I was always the type of person that if it's not broken, don't fix it, which is kind of crazy when you are a car guy, because you want to be proactive with your car's things, not really reactive. But when it comes to purchasing a car, as you guys know, I had my 5th gen SS for almost 8 years. 8 years, guys. So when I buy a car, it's usually to commit to the car. So for me to find an excuse to upgrade, I was throwing constant things. I was being very specific. I was like, the car had to be manual. That was a non-negotiable. No matter what color, no matter what has been done to the car had to be manual. I don't want an automatic muscle car or automatic car like this, even though there are some merits to having one. The second thing is that it had to have a vibrant color. I'm talking a color like this one, the crystal red metallic, that is just beautiful. Something like imperial blue metallic, or man, even something like orange, I was open to purchasing or to getting for this car. But you know what? There was just not a lot of cars for sale that met that requirement. So I kind of was like, okay, so I don't have to buy a car just yet. Red was always kind of like a color that I was really always leaning towards. but a really interesting type of red like this one. The crystal red was really like the deal sealer for me. So a couple weeks go on, and right around, I would say, yeah, ending of May, Juan Carlos sends me a really nice listing of the car, of this car. He was actually in the process of purchasing it before, but he ended up not being able to get it, whatever, life happens, and he ended up sending it to me. And I would say about the first week of June, I reached out to the dealership, kind of just like impulsively. I did it literally late at night. And the email back says, hey Gabriel, yes, the car is available. And might I say, it is in great condition. And as soon as I got that, I was like, oh God, this is it. This is the start of a possibly really poor financial decision, but, well, let's get to a little acceleration brake here. Oh man. Let's get back to the conversation, which was the initial contact with the dealership, which, by the way, it ended up being a co-signment dealership, which essentially means that this is a dealer that will sell a car on behalf of a client for a commission or for a fee, which is going to be very important information later down the line in this video. They're selling cars that are not part of their inventory, so they don't own the cars. So again, we'll come back to that in just a moment here. So when I spoke with the individual, the salesman, he said everything I wanted to hear. The car has not been beaten on, it's low mileage. Bruh, I'm not gonna race an X3, bro. What the hell? Yeah, goodbye. I did the next thing, which is the most important thing, and asked, hey, do you have any videos of the car starting up, any of that information? The guy pointed to their website directory, which had all of that information. It had pictures and videos, and it's exactly what you want to see as a buyer, and of course, something that you should do as a seller. What ended up happening next is that I got into the conversation of money. All right, so the listed price of this car was $44,000. Back then, it had 20,462 miles, I believe. It had some light modifications, as I mentioned before in a separate video. You guys can check it out if you guys want to see the detailed description of that. Now, with taxes, registrations, and obviously the dealer fee costs, which, by the way, is always something you want to ask before you get into the conversation about the car. It's, what are the costs aside from the registrations, the title, the taxes, all those things? What are the dealership costs that you guys have? Because you want to be super transparent, because that is literally something that could make or break a deal, and honestly could save you thousands of dollars if you decide to go privately. It ended up being about $447 because it's a co-signed dealership. Added all of that together, the potential taxes, the registration, all these things, it ended up being around $48,000 that I would be paying, which was frankly way above what I was looking to pay for this car. Now, that's when I started to, the first part, which was negotiation. The first thing I asked was, okay, would you guys consider lowering the price from $44,000 to $38,500? It's a huge lowball. Obviously, the dealership was like, no, this is not the client's absolute final number is $40,000, and it's not gonna move from there. And I said, well, you know what if we meet halfway to get this deal done? Let's get it $39,300. And of course there was no budge, and I folded. I'm not gonna lie, I folded. But it was at this time when I was realizing that the car's been for sale for quite some time, and I'm not sure if it's kind of because it's a co-signed dealership where the client kind of just was seasonally wanting to sell the car. So I was thinking about some of these things because I wanted to use that later for ammunition if this ever came up. I didn't really think about that when I was coming up with the final figures, but we ended up both parties agreeing to $40,000 in the final sale price of the car. So the next step was to actually come see the car, because again, online it looked absolutely perfect, but you know, you can always make a car look good on pictures. Prior to me actually making the drive, I saw that there was a deposit system that this dealership had, which was putting down $1,000, which was, by the way, it was non-refundable, which is something that was really concerning to me at the time. But at the same time, I was like, you know, this looks like it's gonna be the car. And I told him, before I actually put down any money, I wanna go see the car. So in the meantime, what I was gonna do was start applying for loans, because I couldn't pay $40,000. Well, it was gonna end up being $43,000 or $44,000 with all of the costs incorporated into this final price. Credit unions are typically gonna be a lot more dovish when it comes to lending money, especially with such older cars like this. Now, before we get into the process that it was for applications and whatnot, even if you have stellar credit, and I'm talking over 720, it is going to be nearly impossible to not get shafted with interest rate prices on cars like this, unless it is like a specified lender that is only working with classic cars. The traditional Space Coast Credit Union, you know, whatever your local credit union is, or even traditional banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and all these other big banks, they're going to look at cars that are over 10 years old, and they're immediately going to slap anywhere from 1.5 to 3% more on the loan amount, just because it is an older car. Now, there's some reasons behind that. I'm not gonna get into it in this video or in a future video. You guys can definitely check that out on ChatGPT. But essentially, if you're gonna finance an older car, just be prepared to pay a little bit more regardless of your credit amount. My credit was definitely not over 720. It was in the high 600s. So I already had I was already gonna get a pretty bad rate out of the box, regardless of this being an older car. So I ended up applying for the loan. I actually don't have a pretty extensive credit history, because the cars that I've only had in the past was really just two. My Camaro SS, which was, the loan was for like, I think $9,000 or $10,000, and my Hyundai Azera, which the loan was only for $8,000. So it's actually kind of crazy that throughout all these years, I still really haven't amassed a large portfolio for car borrowing, right? This is my first big loan per se. I actually went through a classic car lender that the dealership recommended me, and immediately I got denied. And it was because I didn't have a rich enough history with credit. So for example, they've only seen me borrow no more than $10,000 per car. So for them, asking for $30,000+ was something that was completely out of the question for underwriting, and they were just not going to do that. Now, some companies will ignore that. They'll obviously incorporate that risk into their interest rate amount when you're financing, but ultimately, it's best to kind of work in doubles. So basically, if you had a loan for $10,000, the next time you finance a car, the maximum that they'll probably end up let you finance is $20,000. So if you finance a $20,000 loan in the past, the most they'll let you do is $40,000, and that's how it continues going. But before we have any more conversations, let's stop the yapping and do another acceleration break. God, this car makes me smile so damn much. So the dealership ended up giving me 3 different types of lenders, and I exhausted all of those referrals. And I even tried going with the bigger banks like Wells Fargo and other banks, but unfortunately banks like those don't really sell to consumers. Like, you can't just walk into Wells Fargo and ask for a loan. You actually have to go through a dealership, and the dealership that I was working with a cosign dealership, didn't actually have an internal financing department. They would basically outsource their loans to the ones that they recommended me, and the ones that they recommended me were completely exhausted at that point. I didn't have the credit, nor the car did not meet the prospect that they were looking for. Essentially, I was not the candidate for these loans. And by the way, this was all happening within a 2-week period, and in those 2 weeks it was, you know, loan accounts being filled out, days of people not answering and getting back to me, back and forth questions about my application or the terms. And you know, throughout this time, the owner of the ZL1, the previous owner of the ZL1, and the dealership were kind of just, you know, twiddling their fingers waiting for me to get an answer. I got a text from the sales guy saying that unfortunately, because this was taking a lot longer, the owner of this car ended up backing out and he didn't want to end up selling the car. And he explained that that was unfortunately some of the things that happen with co-signed deals, because it's not dealership inventory, it's ultimately owned by another person. And because I guess the car was being sold for so long, and I guess the lead was, or I was put out, like I was ready to basically buy the car like as is, I guess the owner must have felt like, hey, you know, let me just keep the car at this point. Right around the time that I got the email that the owner no longer wanted to sell the car to me, I also got a approval letter from Space Coast Credit Union. Now granted, the approval terms were not that great, and when I tell you guys in a future video what the actual terms and the financing rate, you guys are gonna have a heart attack. But I was desperate, I wanted the car, I knew that this would pay off for the channel, and I just really wanted to experience this, so I kind of got a little bit emotional. Unfortunately, I had to snap back to reality after reading the text a few times, and I let him know that, hey, look, I'm sorry that it took me forever to get this approval, but you know where to find me. But you guys know what time it is. Okay, well, here's where things get crazy. The owner not only did not want to sell the car at that point, he wanted to actually raise the price to $43,000. So at that point, I said, you know what, man, I really appreciate you for taking the time and your patience with all of this, but I'm just not paying that amount. But then right around the end of June, I reached out to him again because I still saw that the car was listed on site. And you know, I really did like the car because of this, you know. Oh my God. I mean, okay, well, I wanted to experience that so badly. And then that's when he reached out to me and said, hey, you know, it's still available, yes, but unfortunately, the owner of the car is going to come pick it up. He's been a little bit difficult with this whole ordeal, and he feels like he's just going to end up picking up the car, trading it into a dealership, and just getting a truck. And that really resonated with me. Yeah, dealerships don't work like that. They're not gonna give you way more than market asking. So at that point, I said, you know what, hey, if you can speak to the owner, let him know that I'm still good for $40,000. I'm ready to go. It's just, I had to. It's an open road. I mean, I had to. A few days later go by. This is now around early July, and that's when he reaches out to me and says, hey, wait a minute, wait. I was able to speak with my manager, and the manager spoke with the client, and the client is now willing to move forward, but at $41,000 and not $40,000. And I said, hey man, look, I appreciate that you're moving heaven and earth to get this to me, but you know what? I agreed on $40,000. We agreed with that originally. $1,000 means a lot to me. That is literally possibly a month worth of expenses on the car. If we can get it to $40,000, it's mine, my money's yours, let's move forward with it. And then a couple hours go by and I'm at lunch right now with my family, and I finally get the okay. The guy says, all right, I'm ready to move forward. He agrees to 40,000. So I'm there like, woo, yeah. So the next thing was to actually go and see the car, which I had not done at that point. So I asked my best friend Bryce, we took his Audi R8 V10, and we were all under the impression that by the time we get there, we're basically gonna have the payment ready from Space Coast Credit Union and everything ready to go. So we're going there to go pick up the car because we were very confident in the process, but also that the car was going to be in really good shape, which, by the way, when I got there, it was. But then after making the long drive to Tampa, Florida with my best friend, we realized one thing, and that I didn't actually get an approval. And it was because of a technicality with my application. I wasn't able to get the final approval, but this was rather a preliminary offer. So we were all so damn pissed. And when I was trying to call to try to fix this arrangement, to see if we can fix the application and get this approved and pushed, because I'm at the dealership, and if you're at the dealership, they take precedent over that. I was on hold for, I'm not even kidding, 2 hours and 45 minutes. Let me tell you guys, it was just such a frustrating experience. But look, even though I wasn't able to leave with the car that day, I still left with the idea and the motivation to get the car even more because of just how beautifully kept the car was. Immediately, the next few weeks, I spent all my time trying to work with Space Coast Credit Union to make sure I get that loan approved and finally get my hands on the ZL1. But let's go to a quick acceleration break. So yeah, after that very disappointing but exciting trip nonetheless, I ended up giving them a call the next day, and to my surprise, Space Coast Credit Union's actually working on Saturdays. I did express my discontent with the company for leaving me on hold for nearly 3 hours, and I was able to resolve everything. But while I was speaking to a customer service representative, they told me that I had to redo my entire application because between the time that I applied, got a response, finally decided to move forward with the car, 30 days have gone by. And after 30 days, the application becomes null. You have to reapply again. After 60 days is when they rerun your credit, but I didn't have to do it at that point. So basically, I had to do the entire application again. And it wasn't like it was saved in the database. No. I had to redo everything again. I was able to actually do a reconsideration under a specific program that they had. I don't think it's a program that they have anymore, but essentially I finally got the approval for the car. But then came the most frustrating part of all of this buying experience. Okay guys, so before we get into the next blockade in my 5th generation Camaro buying experience and journey, I'd like to make a shout out to today's sponsor, which is Cars for Bid, an alternative and friendly and easy way of purchasing Copart and salvage vehicles. A few years ago, the only way you could purchase a salvage vehicle or Copart vehicle is if you had a special dealer license and or if you had a special connection. Well, that's no longer the case with Cars for Bid. You can actually register very easily in order to bid on any type of car. Really, there's literally a plethora of different types of cars on their website, even a 5th generation Camaro like this. Now, at the time, I wasn't in a position to take on the experience of purchasing and building up a salvage car, but it doesn't mean you are not in a position to do it. Now, whether you're somebody that loves to work on cars as a passion project, say for your YouTube channel or for you personally, or somebody that just wants to save money on their next high performance cars, it has never been easier to buy a Copart or salvage car with Cars for Bid. It's very simple. All you got to do is go on their website, create an account, answer some basic information about yourself, and of course some financial information, and that's it. You're ready to explore and bid on your next car. Now, of course, if you do not end up winning the bid, that's fine because you get your money reimbursed to you, and guess what? You're ready to start looking for your next car. So remember how I said that the dealership that I was working with was a co-signed dealership? Well, once I got the final approval and the go-ahead and the instructions on how to finally go ahead and finalize this deal, I reached out to the dealership and I gave them the instructions that the lender gave me. They basically said, we need a check from them in order for us to process it, because essentially we're not going to come out of pocket, purchase this, and then afterwards sell it to you. And that's a problem, because Space Coast Credit Union, rightfully so, this large institution was like, well, we're not gonna send a check if we don't show up as the owner of the car on the title, electronically or physically. So when the dealership saw that, they're like, well, you know, we're not gonna do this until you send us the check, because that's not how we work. So it was these two institutions basically headbutting in order to basically make my life a living hell, and I couldn't really do anything about it. So that's when I actually started to get really frustrated, and I got the floor manager and I got the sales guy, and I said, guys, you can go out of pocket, especially if I have the preliminary information. I basically signed a document with my lender saying that I approve of this loan and I'm ready to go. It's like a promise to pay. It's like, I can't back out of this. I already signed everything. But they didn't want to hear it. They wanted nothing to do with it. They basically said, hey, you know what? I'm sorry, we can't do it. So I was like, I can't believe this dealership did not want to go out of pocket, especially when this dealership makes anywhere from 7 to 12% on their sales and their commissions from selling these cars. Like, how could I have gotten to this point and it not go through for something so ridiculous and so overly technical that it's just like, huh? What ended up happening was that I originally then reached out to the owner of the actual vehicle. Now, the way that I did that was actually kind of like FBI-ish in a way. Acceleration brake. Okay, anyways, back when we were exchanging information about the car, the salesman actually gave me a receipt from a shop that basically highlighted all of the modifications and all of the work that had been done to the ZL1 at the time. But the sales guy was actually smart enough to cross out the phone number of the individual or the owner, but he failed to cross out the address. So with the address, I typed it in on Google. By the way, this is all public information. I was able to find the owner's phone number. It ended up being his wife, and I basically explained through text that, hey, you know, I was the guy that was basically going to buy this car, but because of some horrendous technicality, I can't do it anymore. So, you know, she was obviously like, oh, I'm really sorry. And by the way, the wife was a big player and motivator for the car to be sold. So I was definitely reaching out to the right person. Then afterwards, about a day later or so, I hear from the husband, which is the actual owner and driver of this car. I explained the situation to him. We basically spoke about this for about an hour. He was a really cool guy. He basically just talked it out, and he said, well, hey, you know what, Gabe, you know, I'm gonna realistically, like, here's what I want to do. I want to trade in my car. I want to get a truck. I want to do all of these things. You know, I'm sorry that this didn't happen with you, but listen, if you're able to buy this car for me for $45,000, and I had told him, like, hey, you know, we agreed on 40. He's like, yeah, but you know what? You know, I didn't even know that they were selling it for that low of a price. So they were probably eating into their own commissions at that point in order to sell this car just to get it through, which is probably why they didn't want to go out of pocket, because it really wasn't worth it for them. But anyways, this is all news to the owner of the car. And he said, you know what? Look, if you can do it for $45,000, the car is yours. And I respectfully told him, like, hey man, look, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do $45,000. $40,000 is way more that you would get if they were to trade it in at any dealership, and it's also a fair market price, even though the car was in practically pristine condition. And he still said, you know what, I'll sleep on it, but realistically, man, I'm gonna go tomorrow, and you know, you'll probably have to buy from there. And I said, you know what, okay, it is what it is, I understand. Mind you guys, I was so torn. I was just so damn upset that it was constant no's and just more barriers in the way to keep me from having this Camaro. But surely enough, the next day, he took it in to the dealership, and I would say around lunchtime the next day, he called me and said, hey, you know what, let's do 40,000. And I was like, yeah, baby, yeah. Because even though he put in a lot of money into this car, the car just will never be worth that much money. It just wouldn't. So I knew this information and I ran with it. We finally agreed to the price. And I literally told him, I'm like, hey man, I'm gonna make this process so seamless for you. I'm gonna make sure that you have the easiest experience. So what I ended up doing was going back to Space Coast Credit Union. I told him that I'm no longer buying it from the dealership. I'm gonna do a private party. And surely enough, it was a lot easier for me to do it with a private sale than it was with a dealership. I guess because we were just so into it at this point that it just worked out in my favor. Space Coast Credit Union would be cutting two checks. One would be going directly to the owner of the car for the difference. Of course, the equity that he had on the car is what he would be receiving. And of course, the title holder, which was his credit union, would receive the separate check, or the payoff check, essentially. So the title would be transferred to Space Coast Credit Union. And guys, after literally about, I would say, almost 3 months of back and forths and back-to-backs, denials, and long nights of just waiting, and all of these anxiety-inducing experiences, I went to go pick up my car. I literally couldn't sleep the night before because, one, I had just signed myself away to a $40,000+ car, which ended up being right around $43,000 with all of the taxes and the registrations and all these things. And that's not even going to mention the financing costs over the period of ownership. But again, that's going to be for a separate video, guys. I mean, this is basically my reaction every time I finish driving this car. It gives me a breath of fresh air, but then it immediately takes it back. There's a lot of things that I probably missed out because a lot of it was just coming off the top of my head and from memory. There's some dates that I might be mixing up and some details that I might be missing out, but ultimately what you got today was the full story, the most important parts at least. And I gotta say that there's a lot of things that I didn't mention in the video that even predate the decision to even buy the ZL1, which was basically the amount of work that went into purchasing this car. And I'm also really proud of myself for not only being able to go through all of these learning experiences, but also being able to negotiate and learn, and just being able to really fight for what I wanted. You know, this is a car that I truly wanted. This was the spec that I actually really wanted. It met everything I wanted to have. It just did not come easy. And nothing worth fighting for comes easily. It rarely does. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you found it informative and entertaining, go ahead and hit the like button. Helps out tremendously with the algorithm. To hit the subscribe button if you really enjoy my content. Guys, we're almost at 100,000 subscribers. We're at 80,000 subscribers. And guys, don't forget to hit the notification bell if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. But guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.